Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a different kind of story. Not the familiar tales of romance or adventure you might expect, but something older, something that echoes from marble temples and ancient olive groves. You won't find dragons here, though there are monsters enough. No flawless heroes either, just gods and mortals trying to navigate a world where wisdom matters as much as strength, where a single choice can shift the fate of cities, and where one goddess stands at the center of it all, born from thunder and thought itself. If these ancient stories from the Greek world help you drift into dreams, you can like and subscribe, but only if they truly calm your mind. And if you'd like to help our peaceful historical channel grow, your support means more than you imagine. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, the time on your clock, and if you still have a little sleepy hype remaining, send it our way. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting off to the same tales that once echoed through amphitheaters and temple courtyards. So, dim the lights. Let the torches of ancient Athens flicker in your imagination. Settle in, and let's begin with the entire story of Athena, goddess of wisdom, warfare, and so much more. Before we talk about Athena herself, we need to understand what makes her different. The Greek pantheon was crowded with gods, each claiming their own domain, their own stories, their own worshippers. There was Zeus with his thunderbolts and constant infidelities, Poseidon with his earthquakes and temperamental seas, Hera with her jealousy and her peacocks, Aphrodite with her beauty and chaos, Ares with his bloodlust and brutality, and then there was Athena. She stood apart, not because she was more powerful than all the others, though in many ways she was formidable, but because she represented something the Greeks valued perhaps more than anything else: the combination of intelligence and action, of thought and deed, of wisdom applied to the real world. She wasn't just a philosopher goddess sitting in contemplation. She was a warrior who fought with her mind as much as her spear. She was a protector who used strategy over brute force. She was a patron who guided heroes not by doing everything for them, but by teaching them to think, to plan, to see the bigger picture. In a world where gods were known for their passions, their rages, their lusts, and their vendettas, Athena stood for something cooler, calmer, more controlled. That's not to say she didn't have her moments of anger or pride. She did. But even her wrath had a purpose, a lesson, a calculated response rather than an explosion of divine fury. The Greeks, particularly the Athenians, saw in her the ideals they aspired to: strategic thinking, civic responsibility, the balance between masculine strength and what they considered feminine wisdom. She was a virgin goddess, untouched by the romantic entanglements that complicated the lives of so many other deities. And this virginity wasn't just about chastity. It was about autonomy, about being complete in herself, about not being defined by relationships to gods or mortals. She needed no consort to be powerful. She needed no children to leave a legacy. She was, in every sense, her own person, her own force. And perhaps most remarkably, she was the favorite child of Zeus, the king of the gods himself. Not one of his many sons who might challenge his throne, not one of his daughters born of his wife Hera who might carry legitimacy, but Athena, born in a way so strange, so unprecedented, that it defined her from the very first moment of her existence. Her birth story is where we must begin, because nothing about Athena makes sense without understanding how she came into the world. It was not a normal birth, not even by the standards of Greek mythology, where normal was already pretty strange. There were no labor pains, no midwives, no waiting. There was only Zeus, a terrible headache, an axe, and a goddess emerging fully formed, fully armed, and ready for whatever came next. But before that dramatic moment, before the splitting of Zeus's skull and Athena's explosive entrance, there was Metis. Beautiful, clever Metis, daughter of the ancient sea god Oceanus and the titan Tethys. Her name meant cunning intelligence, the kind of wisdom that saw around corners, that anticipated moves 3 steps ahead, that could turn weakness into strength with nothing but wit and guile. She was, in many ways, wisdom personified. And Zeus wanted her. Not just wanted her in his bed, though that too, but wanted her for what it represented. After overthrowing his father Cronus and establishing himself as king of the gods, Zeus understood that power alone wasn't enough. He needed wisdom to maintain his position, to navigate the complex politics of Olympus, to avoid the fate of his father and grandfather before him, both overthrown by their own children. So Zeus pursued Metis. According to some versions of the story, she resisted him, changing her shape again and again to escape his advances. She became a fish, darting through streams. She became a bird, flying beyond his reach. She transformed into creatures large and small, trying desperately to evade the king of gods. But Zeus was nothing if not persistent, and he was every bit as good at shape-shifting as she was. He matched her transformation for transformation, never giving up, never letting her rest, until finally, exhausted by the chase, Metis relented. She became his lover, his counselor, his first wife in some tellings. For a time, things were good. Metis advised Zeus on matters of state and strategy. Her wisdom helped him consolidate his power, navigate disputes among the gods, and establish the order of the cosmos. But then she became pregnant, and everything changed. Because there was a prophecy, as there always seemed to be in Greek mythology. Prophecies were the great complication, the unavoidable future that cast its shadow backward over every present moment. This particular prophecy came from Gaia, the ancient earth goddess, and her consort Uranus, the sky. They warned Zeus that Metis would bear him 2 children. The first would be a daughter, equal to Zeus in strength and wisdom. The second would be a son who would overthrow Zeus and take his throne, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus, just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus before him. It was the cycle of fathers and sons, each generation rising up to take power from the last. Zeus had lived through this story once already. He had been the prophesied son who overthrew his father. He had hidden in a cave as a baby while his mother Rhea protected him from Cronus, who wanted to swallow him like he'd swallowed all his other children. Zeus had grown strong, had freed his siblings from his father's belly, had waged war against the Titans, and had taken the throne by force. He knew how the story went. He knew that prophecies in Greek mythology always came true, no matter how you tried to avoid them. Often, your very attempts to prevent the prophecy were what brought it about. But Zeus was nothing if not determined to break the cycle. So, when Metis told him she was pregnant, when she smiled and placed his hand on her belly to feel the first flutter of divine life, Zeus did the unthinkable. He couldn't kill Metis outright. She was too wise, too clever, too beloved by the other gods. But he could remove her from the equation entirely. Using his power, using cunning that perhaps he learned from her, Zeus tricked Metis. Some stories say he challenged her to a shape-shifting contest, praising her ability to become anything and asking if she could transform into something as small as a fly. Proud of her abilities, wanting to impress the king of gods, Metis shrank herself down to the tiniest of insects, and that's when Zeus struck. He opened his mouth and swallowed her whole, wife and unborn child together, consuming her before she could change back, before she could escape, before she could do anything to stop him. It was a horrific act, even by the standards of Greek gods, who were known for terrible deeds. Zeus had eaten his pregnant wife. But from his perspective, it was necessary. He had prevented the prophecy. There would be no son to overthrow him, because the mother of that son now resided in his belly, unable to give birth, unable to threaten his throne. He had won, or so he thought. Because what Zeus didn't count on was that Metis wasn't entirely gone. She was still alive inside him, and she was still pregnant. The child growing within her continued to develop, nurtured somehow by Zeus's own divine essence. And Metis, ever wise, ever cunning, helped her daughter prepare, even from within her strange prison. Time passed. Days, weeks, months, it's hard to say. The gods experience time differently than mortals. But eventually, Zeus began to feel strange. It started as a discomfort, a pressure in his head that wouldn't go away. Then it became pain, a throbbing, pounding ache that made even the king of gods wince. The pain grew worse, day by day, until Zeus couldn't think, couldn't function, couldn't do anything but grip his head and roar in agony. His skull felt like it was splitting from within, like something was trying to crack open his head from the inside. The other gods watched with concern and confusion. What could possibly affect Zeus this way? What illness could strike the immortal king of Olympus? They tried remedies, but nothing worked. The pain only intensified. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Zeus called for help. In most versions of the story, he summoned Hephaestus, the smith god, his son by Hera. Hephaestus was the craftsman of the gods, the master of metalwork and tools, the one who forged thunderbolts and created mechanical wonders. If anyone could help Zeus, It was him. Hephaestus arrived with his tools, saw his father writhing in pain, and understood what needed to be done. Some versions say Prometheus wielded the axe instead, the Titan who had already proven himself willing to help Zeus when necessary. But most commonly, it's Hephaestus who raised his bronze axe high above Zeus's head. There was no anesthesia, no preparation, just the swift, clean strike of metal against divine skull. The axe came down. Zeus's head split open with a sound like thunder, like lightning striking stone, like the world itself cracking in two. And from the wound, from the very mind of Zeus, sprang Athena. Not as an infant, not as a helpless baby needing care, but as a fully grown woman, tall and powerful, already dressed in gleaming golden armor, already holding a spear and shield, already wearing a crested helmet. She leapt from her father's head with a war cry that shook Olympus, a shout of defiance and declaration that announced her arrival to every god and creature within earshot. The other gods, assembled to witness this strange birthing, stood in stunned silence. Some accounts say they trembled with awe and fear. Even mighty Poseidon stepped back. Even Hera, Zeus's jealous wife, found no words for what she was seeing. Athena stood before them, resplendent and terrible, every inch a warrior, but something more, too. Her eyes were clear and sharp, full of intelligence and purpose. This was no mindless fighter, no mere goddess of battle. This was wisdom incarnate, strategy given form, the perfect marriage of thought and action. Zeus's headache was instantly gone, replaced by pride and wonder. Here was his favorite child, born not from his loins, but from his very mind, carrying none of the taint of sexual creation, pure in a way that transcends normal birth. She had inherited Metis's wisdom and Zeus's power, and she asked no one's permission to exist. She simply was, magnificent and complete, from the very first moment. The symbolism of this birth resonated through all of Greek culture. A goddess born from the head represented intellect, reason, thought made manifest. There was no mother in the traditional sense, which aligned Athena more closely with masculine authority and patriarchal power structures, even as she remained distinctly female. Her full armor at birth spoke to her nature as a warrior goddess, but a warrior who was born ready, born strategic, never needing to learn the arts of war because she emerged already knowing them. She was her father's daughter in every sense, his favorite, his confidant, the child he trusted above all others to understand his plans and support his rule. And yet she was also Metis's daughter, carrying her mother's cunning and wisdom, even if Metis herself remained trapped inside Zeus forever. Some philosophers and priests would later interpret this birth as representing the creative power of the mind, the idea that thought itself can give birth to wisdom and action. Others saw it as reinforcing the supremacy of male creative power, suggesting that even goddesses were better born from fathers than mothers. Still others read it as a story about suppressed feminine wisdom, Metis silenced and consumed, yet finding a way to express herself through her daughter. Whatever the interpretation, the birth of Athena was a defining moment, not just in her story, but in the entire structure of Greek mythology. From that moment forward, she would be present at every major event, guiding heroes, shaping wars, and standing as the embodiment of the qualities the Greeks valued most. And the first thing the gods noticed after the shock of her appearance wore off, after they stopped staring at this newcomer who had literally burst from Zeus's skull, was that she didn't act like a newborn. She didn't need guidance or instruction. She already understood the hierarchy of Olympus, the politics of the divine realm, the unspoken rules and alliances. She greeted Zeus with respect, but not submission. She acknowledged the other gods with courtesy, but no sign of inferiority. From her very first breath, she was their equal in every way that mattered, and in wisdom, she might have been their superior. The age of Athena had begun, and Greek civilization would never be the same. Now that she existed, born in this dramatic and unprecedented fashion, Athena needed to establish her identity, her domain, her place in the pantheon. The Greeks didn't organize their gods into neat hierarchical structures with clear job descriptions. Divine roles overlapped, competed, evolved over time. Multiple gods could claim similar territories, which led to rivalries and conflicts. So when Athena emerged as a goddess of warfare, she immediately found herself in an interesting position. Because there was already a war god, Ares, her half-brother, the son of Zeus and Hera, the embodiment of violent conflict and bloodshed. But Athena and Ares couldn't have been more different, and the Greeks recognized this distinction clearly. Ares represented the chaos of battle, the raw fury of men killing men, the blood and terror and confusion of warfare at its most primal. He was the god of berserker rage, of massacres and slaughter, of violence for its own sake. He reveled in the screaming and the dying, in the clash of weapons and the breaking of bodies. There was no strategy to Ares, no thought beyond the next kill, no concern for justice or cause. He simply loved war in all its brutal horror. The Greeks, somewhat tellingly, didn't like Ares very much. They feared him, certainly. They acknowledged his power and offered him sacrifices to keep him from turning his fury against them. But they didn't admire him. They didn't build grand temples to him or celebrate him in their poetry the way they did other gods. Ares was necessary, perhaps, a force of nature that couldn't be ignored. But he wasn't someone to aspire to or emulate. Athena, by contrast, represented what the Greeks called strategic warfare. She was concerned not just with fighting, but why you were fighting, and more importantly, how to win with minimal casualties, how to use intelligence to overcome superior numbers, how to end conflicts rather than perpetuate them. She understood sieges and defenses, tactics and logistics, the movement of armies and the positioning of troops. When she went to war, it was always for a reason, always with a goal, always with the understanding that war was a tool to achieve peace, not an end in itself. She was the goddess that generals prayed to before battle, asking for wisdom in their decisions. She was the deity that young warriors invoked when they wanted to survive through cleverness rather than strength. The Greeks told stories that highlighted this difference. In the Iliad, Homer's great epic about the Trojan War, there's a scene where Ares and Athena meet on the battlefield. Ares is fighting for the Trojans, caught up in the violence, killing Greeks with savage enthusiasm. Athena confronts him, and their conflict is telling. Ares attacks with brute force, relying on his power and ferocity. Athena doesn't meet him strength for strength. Instead, she outthinks him. She waits for the right moment, sees an opening, and strikes with precision. She wounds him with a stone, sending him howling back to Olympus. The message was clear. Intelligence defeats rage. Strategy defeats strength. Wisdom defeats fury. This wasn't just a personal victory for Athena over her brother. It was a statement of values, a declaration that the Greeks prized cunning and clever thinking over mere physical prowess. But Athena's association with warfare went deeper than just being a better strategist than Ares. She was specifically linked to defensive warfare, to the protection of cities and their people. This made her especially important in ancient Greece, where city-states were constantly under threat from each other and from outside invaders. A city needed walls, yes, but it also needed divine protection, and Athena offered that. She was the goddess you prayed to when enemy armies approached your gates. She was the deity whose temple you built on the highest point of your city, the Acropolis, so she could watch over everything below. Her very presence was understood to be a shield, a defense, a reassurance that wisdom and strategy would prevail over chaos and destruction. And yet, despite being a goddess of war, despite emerging from her father's head in full battle armor, Athena was not defined primarily by violence. She was equally the goddess of wisdom, and this wisdom took many forms. There was practical wisdom, the kind that helped you solve problems and make good decisions in everyday life. There was philosophical wisdom, the deep understanding of truth and reality that Greek thinkers spent their lives pursuing. There was craft wisdom, the knowledge of how to create beautiful and useful things with your hands. And there was strategic wisdom, the ability to see patterns and possibilities that others missed. All of these belonged to Athena's domain. Students and scholars prayed to her for clarity of thought. Philosophers invoked her name in their debates. Craftspeople asked for her blessing on their work. The Greeks recognized that wisdom wasn't just about knowing facts or being smart. It was about understanding how things connected, about seeing the consequences of actions before you took them, about having the judgment to choose rightly when faced with difficult decisions. This kind of wisdom required experience, but it also required something innate, something that couldn't just be learned. And that's what Athena represented. She was born wise. She never had to accumulate knowledge slowly over years, because she emerged from Zeus's head already possessing it. Her wisdom was complete from the beginning, which made her the perfect patron for those who sought wisdom themselves. One of Athena's most important epithets was Parthenos, which meant virgin or maiden. The Parthenon, her most famous temple in Athens, literally means the apartment of the Virgin, referring to Athena herself. But her virginity wasn't just a personal characteristic. It was a fundamental part of her divine identity and what she represented. In the Greek worldview, particularly in Athens, virginity for a goddess like Athena meant autonomy and independence. She wasn't defined by relationships with male gods or mortals. She had no husband to defer to, no children to care for, no romantic entanglements to complicate her judgment or compromise her loyalty. She belonged entirely to herself and to her people, untouched by the sexual politics that dominated so much of Greek mythology. This virginity also had political implications. As a virgin goddess, Athena couldn't be conquered or controlled through marriage alliances, which were a major tool of power in the ancient world. She stood apart from the endless cycles of desire and jealousy that plagued other gods. While Zeus chased after mortal women and Hera raged with jealousy, while Aphrodite caused chaos with her golden apple and Paris made his famous judgment, Athena remained above it all, focused on her true domains of wisdom and strategic action. Her virginity wasn't about repression or prudishness. The Greeks didn't view sex the way modern cultures often do. It was about maintaining a specific kind of power and freedom that came from being unattached. There's a telling story about Hephaestus, the smith god, who had struck Zeus's head with the axe to release Athena. In some versions, Hephaestus was promised Athena as a wife in reward for his help. When he tried to claim his bride, attempting to embrace her, or even, in some darker versions, force himself upon her, Athena rejected him absolutely. She was too quick for him, too strong, too determined. In one particularly strange version of the tale, Hephaestus's seed fell upon Athena's leg. Disgusted, she wiped it off with a tuft of wool and threw the wool to the ground. From this contact with the earth, Gaia gave birth to Erichthonius, one of the early kings of Athens. Athena adopted the child and raised him, becoming a mother without ever compromising her virginity. It's a convoluted story that shows how important her virgin status was. The Greeks would rather invent complicated mythological workarounds than have Athena give up her independence. This combination of wisdom, warfare, and virginity made Athena unique among the goddesses. Hera was powerful as Zeus's wife, but defined largely by that relationship and her jealousy. Aphrodite was influential through her control of desire, but was constantly embroiled in romantic affairs. Artemis was also a virgin goddess, but she withdrew from civilization, preferring wild places and animals. Demeter was defined by her relationship to her daughter and the seasons. Athena alone managed to be fully engaged with civilization, fully powerful in traditionally masculine domains like war and politics, and yet fully autonomous as a virgin goddess answering to no one but herself and perhaps Zeus. She was, in many ways, the Greek ideal of what a woman could be if she transcended traditional gender roles while still maintaining distinctly feminine qualities. The Greeks loved to debate about the gods, to analyze their characters and argue about their meanings. And they would have long philosophical discussions about Athena, about how she could be both warrior and wise, both strategic and just, both feminine and autonomous. Some saw her as evidence that women, if given the chance, could excel in any domain. Others argued that her birth from Zeus rather than from a woman proved that truly great qualities required male origins. Still others pointed out that Athena, despite her power, ultimately always served Zeus's interests, which they took as evidence that even the most powerful woman should defer to male authority. These debates continue even today, with modern scholars still arguing about whether Athena was a feminist icon or a tool of patriarchy. But for the average Greek person in ancient times, these philosophical debates probably mattered less than practical devotion. Athena was a goddess who could help you. If you needed wisdom, you prayed to her. If your city was threatened, you sacrificed to her. If you were about to go into battle, you asked for her blessing. And, if you were lucky, if your cause was just and your strategy sound, Athena might actually help you. Because unlike some gods who played favorites based on personal whims, Athena was known for supporting those who deserved support. Those who used their intelligence, those who fought for good reasons rather than just personal glory. That made her not just powerful, but trustworthy in a way many other gods weren't. And that trust, that sense that Athena would be fair and wise and helpful, made her one of the most beloved deities in the entire Greek pantheon. But if Athena was loved throughout Greece, she was absolutely central to one city in particular. Athens, the greatest of the Greek city-states, named in her honor and protected by her presence. The story of how Athens came to be Athena's special city is one of the most important myths in all of Greek tradition, a tale that explains not just religious devotion, but civic identity itself. It begins with a contest, as so many Greek stories do, a competition between two powerful gods for the right to be the patron deity of a newly founded city. The city that would become Athens was already inhabited. People had been living on the rocky hill that would become the Acropolis for generations. But the settlement was reaching a crucial point in its development, growing larger and more complex, ready to transition from a simple village into a true polis, a city-state with all that implied. And, like all Greek cities, this one needed a patron god or goddess, a divine protector who would watch over the people, receive their sacrifices, and intervene on their behalf when necessary. Two deities stepped forward to claim this honor. Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Both had good claims. Poseidon was one of the most powerful Olympians, brother to Zeus himself, controller of the seas that surrounded Greece and made maritime trade possible. Athena was Zeus's favorite daughter, already famous for her wisdom and her interest in human civilization. The king of the gods, not wanting to show favoritism or cause a rift between his brother and his daughter, declared that there would be a contest. Each deity would offer a gift to the city, and the citizens themselves would choose which gift was more valuable. Whichever god won would become the city's patron, and the city would be named in their honor. The contest would take place on the Acropolis, the high rocky outcrop that dominated the settlement. All the gods of Olympus gathered to watch, along with the citizens and Cecrops, the mythical king of the city, who would judge the contest along with the people. Poseidon went first. He was confident, even arrogant. He was one of the oldest and most powerful gods, after all. Why would mortals choose anyone over him? He strode to the center of the Acropolis, raised his trident high, and struck the rock with tremendous force. The ground shook, the rock split open, and from the crack burst forth a spring, water gushing out onto the dry hilltop. It was an impressive display of power, exactly what you'd expect from the god of the sea. Water was precious in the Mediterranean world. A city with its own spring would have a reliable water source, crucial for survival. The people watching were impressed. Some surely thought the contest was already over. But then they tasted the water. It was salty. Poseidon had created a saltwater spring, practically useless for drinking or irrigation. Some versions say he also created the horse at this moment, a magnificent animal bursting from the ground along with the water, which would have been more practically useful. But even if he did, the disappointing nature of the saltwater spring took the shine off his gift. It was powerful, but not particularly helpful, much like Poseidon himself. Now it was Athena's turn. She didn't make a dramatic gesture or summon impressive special effects. She simply knelt down, dug a small hole in the rocky soil, and planted a seed. The seed immediately sprouted and grew, faster than any natural plant, until a full olive tree stood before them, its silvery green leaves rustling in the breeze, its branches already heavy with ripe olives. The people looked at the tree, puzzled at first. It wasn't as flashy as Poseidon's spring, but then they started to understand. The olive tree was an incredibly valuable gift, perhaps the most valuable gift anyone could give to a Mediterranean city. Olives could be eaten for food. They could be pressed for oil, which was used for cooking, for light in lamps, for religious rituals, even for cleaning the body. Olive wood was useful for building and crafting. The trees themselves, once established, would live for centuries with minimal care, providing harvest after harvest for generations. Unlike the saltwater spring, which was essentially useless, the olive tree was practical, renewable, and would bring prosperity to the entire city. More than that, the olive tree symbolized peace and civilization. While Poseidon's gift had come with violence, the earthquake and the striking of rock, Athena's gift required patience and cultivation. It represented agriculture and settled life, the opposite of warfare and chaos. It was the perfect gift from a goddess of wisdom, something that showed foresight and understanding of what people actually needed. The judgment wasn't even close. Cecrops and the citizens chose Athena. Her gift was simply more valuable, more thoughtful, more useful for building a great city. Poseidon was furious, of course. Some versions say he tried to flood the plain around the city in revenge, and the Athenians had to make sacrifices to appease him. But the decision stood. The city would be called Athens, named for Athena. She would be its patron goddess, its protector, its divine guide. And the olive tree, either that original magical tree or its symbolic descendants, became sacred to Athens. For centuries, Olive trees growing on the Acropolis were protected by law. To harm them was sacrilege. Olive wreaths became the prizes given to victors in Athens's greatest games. Olive oil was one of Athens's major exports, bringing wealth to the city. The olive branch became a universal symbol of peace, a meaning that persists even today. All of this traced back to Athena's wisdom in choosing the right gift, in understanding what would actually benefit the people rather than just impress them. This myth wasn't just a story about gods competing. It was a founding narrative that explained Athens's character and values. By choosing Athena over Poseidon, the Athenians were declaring themselves a city of wisdom over brute force, of strategic thinking over power for its own sake, of civilization and culture over violence and domination. Every time they looked at an olive tree, every time they pressed olive oil, every time they wove cloth or crafted pottery or engaged in the intellectual pursuits that made Athens famous, they were reminded that their city belonged to the goddess of wisdom. And Athena took her role seriously. She didn't just accept the honor of being Athens's patron and then ignore the city. She actively involved herself in Athenian affairs, guiding the city through wars and political crises, inspiring its artists and philosophers, protecting it from enemies. The Acropolis itself became Athena's sacred precinct. At its highest point stood the Parthenon, the temple built in her honor during Athens's golden age in the 5th century before the Common Era. This wasn't just any temple. It was a masterpiece of architecture, one of the most beautiful buildings ever constructed. Designed to honor Athena and showcase Athenian wealth and cultural achievement. Inside stood a massive statue of Athena Parthenos, 38 feet tall, covered in gold and ivory, holding a smaller statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, in one hand. The statue alone contained over 40 talents of gold, a staggering fortune. It was a physical representation of how much Athens valued its patron goddess. But the Parthenon wasn't the only structure dedicated to Athena on the Acropolis. There was also the Erechtheion, a complex temple that marked the spot where Poseidon struck his trident and where Athena's olive tree grew. There was the Temple of Athena Nike, celebrating her role in Athenian military victories. The entire Acropolis was essentially a monument to Athena and her relationship with Athens. And once a year, the city held the Panathenaea, one of the greatest festivals in the Greek world, entirely dedicated to honoring their patron goddess. But we'll talk about that later. The connection between Athena and Athens ran deeper than just temples and festivals. Athena was understood to embody Athenian values, democracy, rational discourse, artistic achievement, naval power, cultural sophistication. When Athens became the leading city-state in Greece, when it developed the world's first democracy, when it produced philosophers like Socrates and Plato, when it created the drama and poetry and art that would influence Western civilization for millennia, all of this was seen as flowing from Athena's blessing and guidance. She had chosen Athens, and in return, Athens had made itself worthy of her, or at least tried to. The relationship between goddess and city was reciprocal, a partnership that benefited both. Even in war, Athena was Athens's protector. When the massive Persian Empire invaded Greece in the early 5th century before the Common Era, threatening to destroy Athens and enslave its people, the Athenians prayed to Athena for deliverance. And, according to their beliefs, she answered. The Greeks defeated the Persians at Marathon, where Athenian strategy and courage overcame larger numbers. Then, when the Persians invaded again 10 years later, the Athenians were forced to evacuate their city, watching from their ships as Persian forces occupied the Acropolis and burned the old temples, including Athena shrines. It must have seemed like abandonment, like their goddess had failed them. But then came the naval battle at Salamis, where the Greek fleet, led by Athens, crushed the Persian navy in the narrow strait. The Athenians interpreted this victory as Athena's work, her strategy given to their generals, her protection extended over their ships. After the Persian Wars, Athens rebuilt the Acropolis in even greater splendor, the Parthenon rising as a testament to Athenian survival and Athena's continuing favor. The city entered its golden age, becoming the cultural and intellectual center of the Greek world. Philosophy flourished, democracy was refined, art reached new heights. And all of it happened under Athena's watchful gaze, the owl-eyed goddess looking down from the Acropolis at the city that bore her name. The relationship between Athens and Athens became so intertwined that it was hard to imagine one without the other. When people thought of Athens, they thought of wisdom, democracy, culture, and Athena. When they thought of Athena, they thought of Athens, the city she had chosen and protected for so many generations. Of course, as a goddess, Athena wasn't limited to Athens. She was worshipped throughout the Greek world, though nowhere as intensely as in her namesake city. Other cities built temples to her. Warriors everywhere prayed to her before battle. But Athens remained her special place, the city that had chosen her gift and received her blessing, the polis that most perfectly embodied her values. And even today, thousands of years later, when people visit the ruins of the Parthenon, when they stand on the Acropolis and look out over modern Athens, they're standing in Athena's territory, in the place where goddess and city came together to create something that would outlast both. Now, let's talk about Athena's symbols, because the Greeks loved symbolic representation. Every god and goddess had objects, animals, and emblems associated with them that helped identify them in art and conveyed something about their nature and powers. For Athena, several symbols became so closely linked to her that you could recognize her instantly from them, even in worn statues or faded paintings. The most famous of these was the owl, specifically the little owl native to Greece, which would come to be called the Athenae Noctua by later naturalists. The association between Athena and owls ran deep through Greek culture. In art, she's almost always shown with an owl perched nearby, sometimes on her shoulder, sometimes on her outstretched hand. But why owls? Several reasons, all interconnected. First, owls were known for their keen night vision, their ability to see in darkness when other creatures were blind. This made them perfect symbols for wisdom and knowledge. for seeing truth when others could not, for perceiving what was hidden. Athena, as the goddess of wisdom, embodied this quality. She could see through deception, understand complex problems, and find solutions where others saw only confusion. The owl represented this piercing insight, this ability to perceive clearly. Second, owls were associated with the night, and night was the time for contemplation, for thinking deeply without the distractions of daily life. Philosophers and scholars often worked by lamplight after dark, when the world was quiet. Athena, as patron of intellectual pursuits, naturally connected to this nighttime realm of thought and study. Third, there was something about the owl's appearance, particularly its large forward-facing eyes, that suggested intelligence and awareness. Unlike most birds, which have eyes on the sides of their heads, owls look directly at you, seeming to study you with intent focus. This direct gaze mirrored Athena's clear-sighted nature, her refusal to look away from difficult truths. The owl became so associated with Athens specifically that Athenian coins featured owls on one side and Athena on the other. These coins circulated throughout the Mediterranean world, spreading both Athenian influence and the connection between the city, the goddess, and the wise bird. When people said someone was carrying owls to Athens, it was equivalent to our modern carrying coals to Newcastle, meaning doing something pointless and redundant. Athens had plenty of owls already, both the actual birds and their representations everywhere. Then there was the olive tree, which we've already discussed in the context of Athena's contest with Poseidon. But beyond that story, the olive tree became a permanent symbol of Athena's nature. It represented peace, prosperity, and the agricultural civilization that allowed human culture to flourish. Olive branches were given to victors in competitions, carried by diplomats seeking peace, and used in countless religious rituals. The silvery green leaves and the precious oil the fruit yielded made olives both practical and sacred. Athena's gift of the olive tree wasn't just a myth. It was a daily reality for Greeks who depended on olive cultivation for their livelihood. Athena's armor and weapons were also symbolic, though in a more straightforward way. She was regularly depicted wearing a helmet, often with a high crest, and carrying a spear and shield. This military equipment identified her as a goddess of warfare, but the style was significant. Her armor was always shown as well-made and functional, not flashy or purely decorative. It suggested a warrior who was practical and prepared, not someone who fought for show. Her spear represented her active engagement in warfare, her willingness to fight when necessary. But it was a defensive weapon more than an offensive one. She held the spear upright or at rest as often as she brandished it in attack. The shield she carried was particularly important because of what often appeared on it. This brings us to one of Athena's most distinctive symbols, the gorgoneon, the severed head of Medusa. After the hero Perseus killed the Gorgon Medusa with Athena's help, he gave the head to the goddess as a thanks offering. Athena placed it on her aegis, a protective garment that was either a cloak or shield depending on the version. Some depictions show it as a scaled cape or breastplate that Athena wore, while others show it as a shield she carried. Either way, Medusa's head became a permanent part of Athena's appearance. Even in death, the Gorgon's head retained its power to turn viewers to stone, making it an apotropaic device, something that wards off evil. Enemies who looked at Athena's aegis would see the terrifying face of Medusa staring back at them, paralyzing them with fear, if not literally turning them to stone. The Gorgoneion became a common protective symbol throughout Greece, used on shields, buildings, and jewelry. But it belonged first and foremost to Athena, a reminder of her role in Medusa's defeat and her connection to Perseus. We'll talk more about that story soon. Some representations also showed snakes on or around Athena, sometimes on her aegis along with the Gorgon's head, sometimes as a separate element. Snakes were complex symbols in Greek culture, associated with both danger and healing, with both chaos and wisdom. For Athena, snakes likely connected to her chthonic aspects, her links to the earth, and to the ancient powers that predated the Olympian gods. There was a legend that a sacred snake lived on the Acropolis, a guardian serpent that was fed honey cakes by the priests. Some stories connected this serpent to Erycthonius, the child Athena adopted, who was part human and part snake. The presence of snakes in Athena's imagery added another layer to her complex nature. Finally, we should mention the aegis itself, even apart from what was displayed on it. The word aegis has entered English meaning protection or sponsorship, as in acting under the aegis of some authority. But originally, it was a specific magical object, sometimes described as a shield, sometimes as a cloak or breastplate, that Zeus possessed and sometimes lent to Athena. The aegis was made from the skin of Amalthea, the goat who nursed Zeus when he was hiding from his father Cronus as an infant. When Zeus shook the aegis, it created storms and thunder. When Athena wore it into battle, it terrified her enemies and protected her from harm. The aegis was power incarnate, divine authority made visible. And the fact that Athena was allowed to use it showed her special status among the gods. All of these symbols worked together to create an image of Athena that was immediately recognizable and rich with meaning. The owl perched on her shoulder spoke of wisdom. The olive branch in her hand promised peace and prosperity. The helmet on her head and spear at her side declared her readiness for war. The aegis, with Medusa's head, protected and terrified. The snakes coiling nearby connected her to earth and ancient powers. Every element told part of her story, conveyed part of her nature. Greek artists, sculptors, and craftspeople used these symbols constantly, creating thousands of representations of Athena that adorned temples, homes, public buildings, and everyday objects. People wore jewelry shaped like owls or olive branches to invoke Athena's blessing. They stamped coins with her image to validate their currency. They carved her into stone to protect their cities. And the symbols worked. Even now, millennia after the last true worshiper of Athena made their final sacrifice, we can look at an ancient statue or vase painting and instantly recognize her. That's a woman in armor with an owl? That's Athena. A figure holding an olive branch with a snake at her feet? Athena again. The owl and olive have become so universally associated with wisdom and peace that their origins in Athena's mythology are sometimes forgotten. But they began with her, with the gray-eyed goddess who loved Athens and looked after those who sought wisdom and fought with honor. Her symbols spoke across centuries and cultures, carrying meaning that transcended language or time, working exactly as symbols should work, by condensing complex ideas into simple, memorable forms. Now we come to one of Athena's most important roles, one that defined her relationship with humanity and secured her place as one of the most beloved deities in the Greek pantheon. Athena was a champion of heroes, a goddess who actively intervened to help mortal men accomplish impossible tasks. Unlike many gods who were capricious or self-serving in their dealings with humanity, Athena seemed genuinely interested in helping people, particularly those who displayed courage, intelligence, and determination. But she didn't help just anyone. She had standards. She favored heroes who used their brains as well as their strength, who fought for noble causes rather than personal glory, who were willing to work for their victories rather than expecting divine handouts. If you met her criteria, if you impressed her with your character and your efforts, Athena could be the most valuable ally imaginable. The story of Perseus is perhaps the clearest example of Athena as helper and guide. Perseus was the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Danae, making him a demigod and Athena's half-brother in a sense. But family connection alone wouldn't have been enough to earn Athena's help. Perseus proved himself worthy through his situation and his response to it. He found himself trapped by King Polydectes, who wanted to marry Perseus's mother against her will. To get rid of Perseus, the king sent him on what should have been a suicide mission, to bring back the head of Medusa, one of the three Gorgons. The Gorgons were monsters, sisters with brass hands, golden wings, and hair made of living snakes. They were so hideous that anyone who looked directly at them turned instantly to stone. Medusa was the only mortal one of the three, which meant she theoretically could be killed. But getting close enough to kill her without looking at her seemed impossible. Perseus set out on this quest with more courage than sense, and that's when Athena intervened. She appeared to Perseus along with Hermes, the messenger god, and the two divinities provided the tools and advice Perseus would need. From Hermes, Perseus received winged sandals that let him fly, a sword sharp enough to cut through Medusa's scaly neck, and a leather bag to safely carry the head once he'd taken it. From Athena, he received something even more valuable, a polished bronze shield so bright that it worked as a mirror. Athena explained the strategy. Perseus couldn't look directly at Medusa, but he could look at her reflection in the shield. The reflection wouldn't turn him to stone, and it would show him where Medusa was and guide his sword stroke. But Athena did more than just give Perseus equipment. She guided him to the Graiae, three ancient sisters who shared a single eye between them, and who knew where to find the Gorgons. She advised him on how to trick the Graiae into revealing the Gorgon's location, She helped him navigate to the far western edge of the world where the Gorgons lived. And when Perseus finally found Medusa sleeping in her cave, Athena guided her hand as he raised his sword. She stood behind him, directing his movements as he looked only at the reflection in his shield, not at the actual monster. With Athena's help, Perseus's blade struck true, severing Medusa's head in one clean cut. From Medusa's neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden giant, both born from her blood. But Perseus didn't stop to marvel at these strange births. Following Athena's advice, he grabbed Medusa's head and stuffed it into his bag without looking at it, then flew away on Hermes' winged sandals before Medusa's immortal sisters could catch him. The head remained dangerous, even severed from the body. Whenever Perseus needed protection, he would pull it from the bag and show it to his enemies, turning them to stone. This power saved him repeatedly on his journey home and afterward. But the head belonged ultimately to Athena, the goddess who had made the quest possible. When Perseus finally completed all his adventures and was ready to settle into peaceful life, he gave Medusa's head to Athena as an offering of thanks. She placed it on her aegis, where it remained forever, a testament to Perseus's courage and Athena's guidance. The story of Perseus and Medusa was one of the most popular myths in Greece, retold countless times in different versions. But the core remained the same: a hero, an impossible task, and Athena providing not just tools, but wisdom and strategy to make victory possible. She helped Heracles, too, though his story was more complicated. Heracles was Zeus's son by the mortal woman Alcmene, and Hera hated him for being evidence of Zeus's infidelity. She persecuted Heracles throughout his life, driving him mad at one point so that he killed his own wife and children. As penance for this crime, Heracles had to complete 12 impossible labors for King Eurystheus. These tasks were designed to kill him, but Heracles was incredibly strong and determined. He would have succeeded on strength alone in some cases, but several of the labors required more than just physical power, and that's where Athena came in. For instance, the 11th labor required Heracles to steal golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, which was guarded by a dragon and belonged to Hera herself. The garden was at the edge of the world, and the apples were tended by Atlas's daughters. Atlas was the Titan condemned to hold up the sky as punishment for his role in the war against the gods. Heracles traveled to where Atlas stood, bent under his eternal burden. Athena advised Heracles on a clever plan. He would offer to hold up the sky temporarily if Atlas would go get the apples from his daughters. Atlas, eager for even a brief respite from his burden, agreed. He passed the sky to Heracles, who strained under the unimaginable weight, and went to fetch the apples. But when Atlas returned with the fruit, he was reluctant to take the sky back. He offered to deliver the apples to King Eurystheus himself, while Heracles continued holding up the sky. It was a trick, an attempt to escape his punishment permanently. But Heracles, following Athena's coaching, tricked Atlas in return. He agreed to the plan, but asked Atlas to hold the sky just for a moment while Heracles adjusted his cloak to pad his shoulders better. Atlas, not thinking it through, took the sky back. And as soon as he did, Heracles grabbed the apples and ran. Athena didn't just observe this clever exchange. According to some versions, she actually helped Heracles hold up the sky while he negotiated with Atlas, her divine strength preventing him from being crushed. It was typical of Athena's help, both practical and strategic. She provided what the hero needed, whether it was advice, tools, or actual physical assistance. But she never did the entire job for them. Heroes had to prove themselves worthy through their own efforts. She just made sure those efforts had a chance to succeed. Athena also aided Jason and the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece. The fleece was in Colchis, far across the Black Sea, guarded by a dragon and the property of King Aeetes. Jason needed a ship capable of making the journey. So Athena taught Argus, the master shipwright, how to build the Argo, the first great ship in Greek mythology. Under Athena's guidance, Argus created a vessel that was not just seaworthy, but had almost magical properties. The ship could think and speak, particularly through a beam made from Zeus's sacred oak at Dodona, which Athena personally installed in the bow. This beam would give the Argonauts advice and warnings throughout their journey. When Jason finally reached Colchis and faced the challenges King Aeetes set for him, it was Aphrodite who made the king's daughter Medea fall in love with Jason, and Medea who provided magic to help him. But Athena's contribution was equally vital. The ship that got him there and back, built with wisdom and craft. Bellerophon was another hero who benefited from Athena's help. He needed to kill the Chimera, a monster with a lion's head, a goat's body rising from its back, and a serpent's tail. The creature breathed fire, making it nearly impossible to approach. Bellerophon needed an advantage, specifically the ability to attack from above, out of range of the flames. That meant he needed Pegasus, the winged horse that had sprung from Medusa's blood when Perseus beheaded her. But Pegasus was wild, untamed, answering to no human. Bellerophon prayed to Athena for help, and she responded by giving him a golden bridle with magical properties. When Bellerophon placed this bridle on Pegasus, the horse became calm and willing to be ridden. With Pegasus under his control, Bellerophon could fly above the Chimera, raining arrows and spears down on the monster until it died. Again, Athena didn't kill the monster for him, but she gave him the tool and the knowledge he needed to succeed. And then there was Odysseus, perhaps Athena's favorite mortal hero. Odysseus, king of the island of Ithaca, was famous for his cunning and cleverness even before the Trojan War. He was the one who came up with the plan for the Trojan horse, the trick that finally ended the 10-year siege of Troy. And from the very beginning, Athena took a special interest in him. She admired his quick thinking, his ability to talk his way out of dangerous situations, his refusal to give up even when things seemed hopeless. In the Iliad, Athena fights beside the Greeks throughout the war, but she pays particular attention to Odysseus and Diomedes, the two warriors who most embody strategic thinking. She gives them strength and courage. She guides their spears in battle. She protects them from enemy attacks. But her relationship with Odysseus really developed during his long journey home after the war, the journey described in Homer's Odyssey. It took Odysseus 10 years to get home from Troy. 10 years of wandering and adventures and disasters. He faced the Cyclops, the Lotus Eaters, Circe the witch, the Sirens, the monsters Scylla and Charybdis, and countless other dangers. His entire crew died during the journey, lost to storms and monsters and their own foolishness. Odysseus survived alone, through a combination of his own cleverness and Athena's subtle help. She couldn't always intervene directly, because Poseidon, who hated Odysseus for blinding his son the Cyclops, would have opposed her. But she helped when she could, planting ideas in Odysseus's mind, appearing to him in disguise to give advice, protecting him from dangers he couldn't see coming. When Odysseus finally reached Ithaca, he faced perhaps his greatest challenge. His house was full of suitors, men who wanted to marry his wife Penelope and take his kingdom, assuming Odysseus was dead. There were over 100 of them, all armed, all occupying his home and eating his food. Odysseus was alone, unrecognized, no longer the mighty warrior he'd been 20 years earlier. How could one man defeat over 100? This was where Athena's help became most important. She disguised Odysseus as an old beggar, so he could enter his own house without being recognized. She gave him the patience and wisdom to wait for the right moment rather than attacking immediately. She advised him on how to test Penelope's loyalty without revealing himself too soon. And when the time finally came for Odysseus to reveal himself and fight the suitors, Athena was there, boosting his strength, guiding his arrows, helping even the odds. The battle in Odysseus's hall, one old man against more than 100 young warriors, should have been a slaughter. But with Athena's help, with careful planning, and the element of surprise, Odysseus and his son Telemachus and 2 loyal servants managed to kill every single suitor. Athena didn't do it for him, but she made it possible for him to do it himself. That was her way. She championed heroes not by solving their problems, but by helping them solve their own problems, by providing the tools and wisdom and strategy they needed, but requiring them to find the courage and determination and cleverness to actually execute the plans. In all of these stories, from Perseus to Heracles to Jason to Odysseus, the pattern was consistent. Athena helped those who helped themselves, who showed intelligence and determination, who didn't give up even when things seemed hopeless. She was the ultimate patron for heroes who understood that brains mattered as much as muscle, that strategy trumped strength, that wisdom was the greatest weapon of all. But Athena wasn't just active in individual heroic quests. She played a major role in the single most important event in Greek mythology, the Trojan War. This decade-long conflict between the Greeks and the city of Troy was the subject of Homer's Iliad and countless other stories. It shaped Greek culture and identity more than any other mythological event. And Athena was there from the very beginning, one of the key divine players, fighting on the Greek side, helping to determine the outcome. But before we talk about her role in the war itself, we need to understand how the war started, and that involves one of the strangest and most consequential myths in Greek tradition: the judgment of Paris. It began at a wedding. Peleus, a mortal hero, was marrying Thetis, a sea nymph, and all the gods were invited to the celebration, all except one. Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, was deliberately excluded because, well, she was Eris. Inviting the goddess of discord to your party seemed like asking for trouble, but leaving her out proved to be an even bigger mistake. Furious at being snubbed, Eris decided to cause problems anyway. She took a golden apple, inscribed it with the words, "To the fairest," and rolled it into the midst of the wedding celebration. 3 goddesses immediately claimed it should belong to them: Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of the gods; Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty; and Athena. Each was convinced she was clearly the most beautiful, the most deserving of the title fairest. The gods looked at Zeus to settle the dispute, but Zeus wisely wanted nothing to do with it. Choosing between his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of beauty seemed like a no-win situation. So Zeus appointed a judge from outside Olympus, Paris, a prince of Troy who was working as a shepherd on Mount Ida, not knowing his true identity. Paris was young, handsome, and known for his judgment. Surely he could make this decision. So the 3 goddesses appeared before Paris, each making her case for why she deserved the apple, and each offering Paris a bribe in exchange for choosing her. Hera offered Paris political power. If she chose her, she would make him king of all Europe and Asia, the most powerful ruler in the world. It was a tempting offer, the promise of dominion and authority beyond imagining. Then Athena made her pitch. She offered Paris wisdom and victory in war. If he chose her, she would make him the greatest warrior who ever lived, victorious in every battle, honored by all. He would have fame that would last forever, glory beyond measure. For a young man, especially one who didn't know he was actually a prince, this was intensely appealing. Athena was offering not just success, but earned success, the admiration that comes from actual achievement. But then Aphrodite stepped forward with her offer, and everything changed. She promised Paris the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, Queen of Sparta. It didn't matter that Helen was already married to King Menelaus. It didn't matter that taking her would cause a war. Aphrodite promised that if Paris chose her, Helen would fall in love with him, leave her husband, and be his forever. Paris, thinking like the young man he was, rather than the wise prince he might have been, chose Aphrodite. He gave her the golden apple, declaring her the fairest. And from that moment, the Trojan War became inevitable. Because Athena and Hera were not goddesses who accepted defeat gracefully. They were furious, not just at losing the contest, but at being rejected in favor of a promise of romantic love rather than power or wisdom. From that moment on, both goddesses hated Paris, hated Troy, and dedicated themselves to destroying the city. When Paris did travel to Sparta, when he did seduce Helen and take her back to Troy with him, when Menelaus gathered all the Greek kings and heroes to sail to Troy and take Helen back by force, Athena was ready. She supported the Greek side completely throughout the 10-year siege that followed, working tirelessly to bring about Troy's destruction. In the Iliad, Homer shows us Athena actively fighting in the war. She doesn't just watch from Olympus and occasionally offer advice. She's on the battlefield, invisible to most mortals, but very much present. She gives strength to Greek warriors when they're flagging. She guides spears and arrows to their targets. She turns aside Trojan weapons that would otherwise have killed Greek heroes. At one point, she even fights against Ares when he joins the battle on the Trojan side. And, as we mentioned earlier, she defeats him easily, wounding him and sending him crying back to Zeus. One of the most dramatic scenes in the Iliad involves Athena and the Greek warrior Diomedes. On one particular day of fighting, Athena grants Diomedes special power and removes the mist from his eyes so he can see the gods on the battlefield. With this divine sight and Athena's strength flowing through him, Diomedes becomes unstoppable. He wounds Ares in combat, which should have been impossible for a mortal. He even wounds Aphrodite when she tries to rescue her son Aeneas from the fighting, striking her hand and making ichor, the divine blood, flow. This would normally bring terrible punishment. You don't injure gods and get away with it. But Athena protected Diomedes from the consequences because he was acting under her authority, following her guidance. She wanted to humiliate Aphrodite, to show her that choosing beauty over wisdom had consequences. But Athena's greatest contribution to the Greek victory came not through direct combat, but through strategy. After 10 years of siege, the Greeks were no closer to taking Troy. The city's walls were too strong, its defenses too well organized. They needed a new approach, something that relied on cunning rather than force. And that's when Odysseus came up with his brilliant plan, the Trojan horse. The Greeks would build an enormous wooden horse, hide their best warriors inside it, and leave it at Troy's gates as they appeared to sail away, abandoning the siege. The horse would be described as an offering to Athena, a sacred object meant to help the Greeks get home safely. The Trojans, hopefully, would bring it inside their walls as a trophy, never suspecting it was full of armed men. Athena supported this plan completely. Some versions of the myth even say she helped design the horse itself, providing guidance to Epeius, the craftsman who built it. She certainly helped sell the deception. When the Greeks sailed their ships to a nearby island to hide and wait, when they left only one man behind to tell the lie about the horse being a gift to Athena, she made sure the Trojans believed him. And when a Trojan priest named Laocoon warned his people that the horse was a trick, Athena sent serpents from the sea to kill Laocoon and his sons, silencing the one voice that might have saved Troy. It was a ruthless move, killing not just Laocoon, but his innocent children. But Athena was committed to Troy's destruction, and she wouldn't let one priest's wisdom interfere with her revenge. The Trojans brought the horse inside their walls. That night, while they celebrated their apparent victory, while they drank and feasted and let their guard down, the Greek warriors emerged from the horse and opened the city gates for their army, which had sailed back under cover of darkness. Troy fell in one night of blood and fire. The Greeks showed no mercy, killing the Trojan men, enslaving the women and children, burning the great city to ash and rubble. And Athena watched it all, her revenge complete. Paris was dead, killed in the fighting. Troy was destroyed. She had won. But the end of the Trojan War didn't mean the end of Athena's involvement, because some of the Greeks had behaved badly during the sack of Troy, violating the customs of war and the laws of hospitality. And Athena, who valued civilization and proper behavior even in warfare, was angry about this. The worst offender was Ajax the Lesser, not to be confused with Ajax the Great, one of the Greeks' greatest heroes. Ajax found Cassandra, a Trojan princess and priestess of Athena, praying in Athena's temple, clinging to the statue of the goddess for protection. By all the laws of war and religion, she should have been safe there. Temples were sacred spaces. Suppliants seeking divine protection were not to be harmed. But Ajax dragged Cassandra from the statue and violated her right there in Athena's temple, committing sacrilege in the most direct and offensive way possible. Athena was furious. Ajax had desecrated her temple and shown contempt for the sanctuary she provided. But Agamemnon, the Greek commander, didn't punish Ajax properly, afraid of causing dissension in the Greek ranks now that the war was won. This made Athena even angrier. If the Greeks wouldn't police themselves, she would punish them herself. So, when the Greek fleet set sail for home, Athena called on her father Zeus and her uncle Poseidon to send storms. These weren't normal storms. These were divine tempests, massive enough to scatter the entire Greek fleet across the Mediterranean. Ships were wrecked, men drowned by the hundreds. Some Greeks were blown so far off course that it took them years to get home, if they ever did. Odysseus's 10-year wandering was partly Athena's doing, her punishment for Greek crimes. Ajax the Lesser was killed when Poseidon wrecked his ship, though even then his arrogance continued. He claimed he would survive despite the gods. So Poseidon struck him down with his trident, sending him to the bottom of the sea. Yet, even as Athena punished the Greeks collectively, she protected Odysseus specifically, creating an interesting contradiction. She was angry at the Greeks as a whole, but still favored individual heroes who met her standards. This complexity was very Greek. The gods weren't entirely consistent. They could be angry and helpful at the same time, punishing some while rewarding others, containing multitudes just like human beings. Athena's role in the Trojan War showed all aspects of her nature. She was strategic, helping plan the Trojan horse. She was a warrior, fighting beside the Greeks. She was protective, strengthening her chosen heroes. She was vengeful, destroying Troy to punish Paris for his insult. And she was principled, punishing even her own side when they violated the rules of civilization. The war was perhaps her finest hour and her most problematic moment, showing both her greatness and her capacity for ruthlessness when she felt wronged. The war also cemented her reputation as the goddess of strategic warfare. Anyone could fight. Eris proved that. But it took someone like Athena to win, to see the paths to victory that others missed, to understand that sometimes a clever trick was worth more than 1,000 warriors. The Trojan horse became one of the most famous stratagems in all of military history, remembered millennia after the war itself passed into legend. And it was associated forever with Athena, the goddess who understood that wars were won in the mind before they were won on the battlefield. But Athena wasn't always merciful or just in her dealings with mortals. Like all Greek gods, she had a temper, and those who offended her faced terrible consequences. The stories of Athena's wrath are some of the darker tales in Greek mythology, showing that wisdom didn't always mean mercy, and that divine pride could be as dangerous as any other emotion. Let's talk about Medusa first, because that story involves Athena in a particularly problematic way. We've already discussed how Perseus killed Medusa with Athena's help, but we haven't talked about how Medusa became a monster in the first place. The earliest versions of the Medusa myth simply described her as a monster from birth, one of 3 Gorgon sisters born to the sea god Phorcys and his sister Ceto. But later versions, particularly the Roman poet Ovid's telling, gave Medusa a tragic backstory that made Athena the villain of the piece, or at least morally complicated. According to Ovid, Medusa was originally a beautiful mortal woman, a priestess in Athena's temple. She was so lovely that Poseidon desired her, and, being Poseidon, he didn't take no for an answer. He cornered Medusa in Athena's temple and violated her there, on the temple floor, in the goddess's sacred space. This was a horrible crime, both against Medusa personally and against Athena's temple. You would think Athena's anger would fall on Poseidon, the actual perpetrator. But instead, Athena punished Medusa. In her rage at the desecration of her temple, the goddess transformed the young priestess into a hideous monster. Medusa's beautiful hair became a writhing mass of venomous snakes. Her lovely face became so terrible that anyone who looked at it turned instantly to stone. Her graceful body became scaly and horrific. She was exiled to a cave at the edge of the world, forced to live in isolation, knowing that anyone who saw her would die. And then, eventually, Athena sent Perseus to kill her, using Medusa's severed head as a permanent decoration on her aegis. It's a disturbing story, one that raises difficult questions about divine justice and the treatment of victims. Why did Athena punish Medusa instead of Poseidon? Some ancient explanations claimed that Medusa had boasted about her beauty, claiming to be lovelier than Athena herself. and that the transformation was punishment for this hubris rather than for the assault. But even that doesn't make the story much better. Athena comes across as cruel and petty, more concerned about her temple's purity and her own vanity than about justice for a woman who had suffered violence. Modern interpretations of the myth often focus on this injustice, seeing Medusa as a victim punished twice, first by Poseidon and then by Athena. Some feminist readings reclaim Medusa as a symbol of feminine rage, transforming her from victim into avenger, her deadly gaze a weapon against male violence. But in the ancient Greek context, Athena's behavior would have been seen differently. The gods weren't expected to be perfectly just by human standards. They were powerful beings with their own priorities and concerns. Athena's anger at the desecration of her temple made sense from that perspective. The violation of sacred space was a serious offense that required a response. And perhaps there was an element of protecting Medusa, too, transforming her into something so terrible that no man would ever assault her again. It's a complicated story that doesn't have easy answers, and it remains one of the most debated tales in all of Greek mythology. Then there's the story of Arachne, which is somewhat clearer in its moral lesson, even if that lesson is harsh. Arachne was a mortal woman from Lydia in Asia Minor, famous throughout the region for her skill at weaving. She could create fabric and images so beautiful, so lifelike, that people came from great distances just to watch her work. Her tapestries were masterpieces, rivaling anything produced by the gods themselves. And, unfortunately, Arachne knew it. Pride crept into her heart. When people praised her work and said she must have been taught by Athena herself, the goddess of crafts and weaving, Arachne denied it. She claimed that her skill was entirely her own, that she had learned nothing from any god, and that she was perhaps even better than Athena. This was dangerous talk. The gods didn't appreciate mortals claiming to be their equals or superiors. Athena heard about her boasts and decided to give the girl a chance to back down. She disguised herself as an old woman and went to Arachne's workshop. She praised the young woman's skill, but gently suggested that perhaps Arachne should show more humility, should thank the gods for her talents rather than claiming all the credit herself. But Arachne, full of youthful arrogance, rejected the advice. She even challenged Athena herself to a weaving contest, if the goddess dared to face her. At this, Athena revealed her true form. The old woman transformation fell away, and the goddess stood before Arachne in all her terrible glory. Did Arachne back down, apologize, beg for mercy? No. She doubled down on her challenge. If Athena wanted to prove she was better at weaving, let her prove it. They would compete, and the quality of their work would speak for itself. Athena accepted the challenge. The two set up their looms side by side. People gathered to watch this unprecedented contest between goddess and mortal. The weaving began. Athena created a tapestry showing the gods in all their glory, with particular emphasis on the times when the gods had punished mortals for hubris. It was beautiful beyond description. Every thread perfectly placed, every color blending into the next with divine skill. The images seemed to move and breathe. No mortal could have created anything like it. And then Arachne finished her tapestry, and the crowd fell silent, because it was every bit as beautiful as Athena's. The quality of the weaving was flawless, perhaps even more technically perfect than the goddess's work. But the subject matter was different. Arachne had woven images of the gods behaving badly, of Zeus's many affairs and disguises, of divine trickery and cruelty, of all the ways the gods had abused and betrayed mortals. It was not just excellent craftsmanship. It was an indictment, a criticism of the gods themselves. Athena looked at Arachne's tapestry and felt a complex mixture of emotions. She couldn't deny the skill on display. The work was genuinely magnificent. But the subject matter was insulting, impious, showing the gods at their worst. And the fact that Arachne had matched or even exceeded Athena's own technical skill was infuriating to the goddess's pride. She had been challenged, and she had not clearly won. This was intolerable. In her rage, Athena tore Arachne's tapestry to shreds, destroying the masterpiece. Then she struck Arachne with her shuttle, beating the girl about the head. Arachne, devastated by the destruction of her work and terrified by the goddess's fury, ran from the room and hanged herself. But Athena wasn't done. She brought Arachne back from death and transformed her. The girl's body shrank and changed. Her fingers became legs. Her form became round and segmented. And she became the first spider, condemned to weave for eternity, but never again to create the beautiful tapestries she had loved. Her descendants, all the spiders of the world, would continue her work, spinning webs with geometric precision, but never again achieving the artistry that had made Arachne famous. The moral of the story was clear. Don't challenge the gods. Don't show hubris. Don't claim to be equal to divinities. It was a teaching story, meant to enforce proper humility and respect for the divine. But it also shows Athena's capacity for cruelty when her pride was wounded. She couldn't bear to be equaled by a mortal, even when that mortal was genuinely talented. The punishment she inflicted was eternal and transformative, changing Arachne's very nature. It was divine power used to crush a challenge to divine authority. Wisdom weaponized in service of pride. There's also the story of Tiresias, which was slightly more sympathetic to Athena's perspective, but still showed her willingness to punish harshly. Tiresias was a young man from Thebes who accidentally came upon Athena while she was bathing in a mountain spring. He didn't mean to spy on her. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he saw the goddess naked, which was a violation of her privacy and dignity. Athena was furious. The punishment for seeing a goddess nude was traditionally blindness, and Athena struck Tiresias blind immediately. He would never see again, his eyes gone dark as punishment for what he'd witnessed. But Tiresias's mother was the nymph Chariclo, who happened to be one of Athena's favorite companions. Chariclo begged the goddess to show mercy, to restore her son's sight. Athena refused. What was done was done. The laws about seeing gods in vulnerable moments were absolute, even for accidents. But Athena did feel some sympathy for Chariclo's grief, and she wanted to compensate Tiresias somehow for the harshness of his punishment. So she gave her gifts. She cleaned her ears so he could understand the language of birds, learning from their calls truths about the future. She gave him a staff that would guide him as well as vision could. And most importantly, she granted him the gift of prophecy. Tiresias would become the greatest seer in Greece, able to see the future more clearly than any person could see the present. His blindness became the path to greater sight, to understanding that transcended normal perception. It was still a harsh punishment for an accident. Tiresias spent the rest of his long life blind, but he also became one of the most respected and powerful figures in Greek mythology, the prophet that heroes and kings consulted when they needed to know what fate held in store. Athena's gift transformed his tragedy into something meaningful, though it didn't erase the tragedy. These stories of Athena's wrath show a goddess who was not always kind or merciful, who valued respect and proper behavior above compassion, who would punish perceived offenses severely, even when the offender meant no harm or was themselves a victim. She was a complex deity, capable of great help and terrible vengeance, embodying the contradictions that made Greek gods feel real and human, rather than idealized and remote. Now let's turn to something more positive, the worship of Athena and how ordinary people interacted with her in their daily lives. Because for all the myths about heroes and monsters, about wars and transformations, the reality of Athena's importance came down to the simple fact that people prayed to her, built temples for her, held festivals in her honor, and integrated her into the fabric of their society. Nowhere was this more true than in Athens, where worship of their patron goddess reached levels of devotion that bordered on obsession. The Parthenon, which we've mentioned several times, deserves a proper description, because it was the centerpiece of Athenian religious life and one of the most magnificent buildings ever constructed. It sat atop the Acropolis, the rocky hill that dominated Athens, visible from everywhere in the city and for miles around. Getting to the Parthenon required climbing up the steep path to the Acropolis, passing through the Propylaea, the monumental gateway, and emerging onto the sacred precinct at the top. And there it stood, gleaming white marble, perfectly proportioned, surrounded by columns that seemed almost alive in the Mediterranean sunlight. The Parthenon was built during Athens's golden age in the 5th century before the Common Era, after the city had defeated the Persian invasion and established itself as the leading power in Greece. The man behind the project was Pericles, Athens's greatest statesman, who convinced the citizens to use money from the Delian League, ostensibly an alliance for mutual defense, to beautify Athens and honor Athena. Not everyone agreed with spending alliance funds this way. Some saw it as theft from Athens' allies. But Pericles argued that the gods deserved the best, that Athens deserved the best, and that the Parthenon would stand as a testament to Athenian greatness for all time. He was right. The architects Ictinus and Callicrates designed the temple with mathematical precision, using subtle curves and adjustments to create an optical illusion of perfect straightness. The sculptor Phidias oversaw the decorative program, creating the sculptures that adorned the pediments, metopes, and frieze. These sculptures told stories. The pediments, the triangular spaces at each end of the building, showed the birth of Athena and her contest with Poseidon for Athens. The metopes, square panels between the roof and the columns, depicted various battles: gods against giants, Greeks against Amazons, Lapiths against centaurs, Greeks against Trojans. These battles symbolized civilization's triumph over chaos, order over disorder, Greek culture over barbarism. And the frieze, which ran around the entire inner building, showed the Panathenaic procession, the annual parade of Athenians bringing offerings to Athena. Inside the Parthenon stood Phidias's masterpiece, the statue of Athena Parthenos. This wasn't just any statue. It was over 38 feet tall, built around a wooden core, and covered with ivory for the skin and over a ton of gold for the clothing and armor. Athena stood upright, wearing her helmet and aegis, holding a 6-foot statue of Nike in her right hand and her spear in her left. Her shield leaned against her left side, and the Gorgonaion stared out from her chest. At her feet coiled a serpent, representing Erichthonius, or the protective snake of the Acropolis. The statue's eyes were made of precious stones. The details were incredible, down to tiny images on the shield showing the battle of gods and giants, and on the sandals showing the fight between Lapiths and centaurs. The statue was designed to inspire awe, to make viewers feel the power and majesty of the goddess, to understand that they stood in the presence of divinity. The Parthenon wasn't just a temple. It was a treasury, a work of art, a political statement, and a manifestation of Athenian identity all in one. People came from all over Greece to see it, and they left impressed by Athens's wealth and piety. But the Parthenon was only one of several structures dedicated to Athena on the Acropolis. The Erechtheion, nearby, was an older and stranger temple that marked several sacred spots, where Poseidon struck the rock with his trident, where Athena's olive tree grew, and where Erichthonius was said to have lived. The Erechtheion's design was unusual, asymmetrical, because it had to accommodate these different sacred locations. It's famous for the porch of the Caryatids, 6 columns carved as young women bearing the roof on their heads, another artistic masterpiece. There was also the Temple of Athena Nike, celebrating her as goddess of victory, positioned at the entrance to the Acropolis. But worship of Athena wasn't confined to grand temples. There were smaller shrines throughout Athens and Attica, places where people could make quick offerings or prayers. Every household would have had a small altar or image of Athena, particularly if anyone in the family was a craftsperson or soldier. She was part of daily life, invoked for help with everything from weaving cloth to studying for philosophical debates. People would offer her simple gifts: olive oil, bread, wine, flowers, small clay figurines. The wealthy might sacrifice sheep or cattle at the major festivals. Priests and priestesses maintained the temples, performing the daily rituals and sacrifices, keeping the sacred fires burning. These religious officials were often chosen from prominent Athenian families, and serving as a priest or priestess of Athena was a great honor. But the highlight of Athenian worship of Athena was the Panathenaea, the great festival held every summer in her honor. There were two versions, the Lesser Panathenaea, held annually, and the Greater Panathenaea, held every 4 years and featuring expanded events and competitions. The Greater Panathenaea was one of the largest religious festivals in the entire Greek world, drawing visitors from across the Mediterranean. It lasted for several days and included athletic competitions, musical contests, rhapsodic recitations of Homer's epics, and religious rituals. Athletes competed in races, wrestling, boxing, the pentathlon, and chariot racing. Musicians played and sang. Dancers performed. But the centerpiece of the festival was the procession, depicted on the Parthenon frieze. On the final day of the Greater Panathenaea, all of Athens participated in a massive parade from the city through the agora, or marketplace, up to the Acropolis. The procession included officials, priests, athletes who had won competitions, soldiers in armor, cavalry on horseback, young men carrying offerings, and young women of good families serving as kanephori, basket bearers, carrying the tools and items needed for sacrifice. Musicians played, choirs sang hymns, and at the center of it all was the peplos, a special robe woven by Athenian women over the course of the year specifically for this festival. The peplos was embroidered with scenes from the battle of gods and giants, showing Athena's role in defending divine order. It would be placed on the old wooden statue of Athena Polias, the ancient image that predated the Parthenon, housed in the Erechtheion. The procession wound through the streets, giving all Athenians and visitors a chance to participate in honoring their patron goddess. When it reached the Acropolis, priests performed the hecatomb, the sacrifice of 100 cattle, possibly more. The animals were slaughtered at the altar, and their blood was offered to Athena. Then the meat was distributed among the citizens, with portions going to officials, priests, and the general population. This communal feast was important because it meant everyone, rich and poor, got to share in the sacrifice, reinforcing civic unity and shared identity as Athenians under Athena's protection. The Panathenaea wasn't just about religion. It was also about demonstrating Athenian power and culture to the rest of Greece. The prizes for athletic competitions were valuable. Amphoras filled with olive oil pressed from the sacred trees of Athena. The best poets and musicians competed, knowing that winning at the Panathenaea could make their reputations. The festival was politics, culture, religion, and entertainment all mixed together, a perfect embodiment of how intertwined these aspects of life were in ancient Athens. And at the center of it all was Athena, receiving honors, accepting sacrifices, and in the minds of the participants, blessing the city and its people for another year. Beyond Athens, Athena was worshipped throughout the Greek world. Sparta, Athens's great rival, also honored Athena, particularly as a goddess of warfare. Her temple in Sparta was called Athena Chausioikos, Athena of the Bronze House, because the temple was covered in bronze plaques. In Corinth, Athena was worshipped as a goddess of crafts, appropriate for a city famous for its pottery and metalwork. In Thebes, she had several temples and a role in local mythology. Greek colonies in Sicily, southern Italy, and around the Black Sea built temples to Athena as a connection to the mother culture and as a plea for her protection in their new homes. Even non-Greek peoples who came under Greek cultural influence adopted Athena worship. The Romans identified her with their goddess Minerva and continued building temples to her throughout the empire. The worship of Athena lasted for over 1,000 years, from at least the Bronze Age Mycenaean period through the Classical Greek era and into Roman times. Only with the rise of Christianity did the temples finally close, the sacrifices finally cease, the festivals finally end. The Parthenon itself became a Christian church, then later a mosque when the Ottoman Turks conquered Greece, its history as a pagan temple slowly fading from memory. But the goddess herself, the idea of Athena, never completely disappeared. Because wisdom, strategic thinking, and civilization itself, the things Athena represented, were timeless values that transcended any particular religion or culture. And that brings us to our final section, Athena's legacy, and what she means today, thousands of years after the last offering was laid on her altars. When Christianity became dominant in the Mediterranean world, the old gods were officially abandoned. Their temples were closed, converted, or destroyed. Their stories were sometimes preserved, but more often dismissed as myths and superstitions from a benighted pagan past. Zeus became a cautionary example of prideful delusion. Aphrodite became a symbol of sinful lust. Eris became simple violence glorified. But Athena? Athena was harder to dismiss because the qualities she embodied, wisdom, strategic thinking, protection of cities, patronage of arts and crafts, were universally valued. You didn't have to believe in her divinity to appreciate what she represented. So even as her worship ended, her image and her stories persisted. Medieval scholars, particularly in the Byzantine Empire, preserved classical texts that mentioned Athena. When these texts made their way to Western Europe during the Renaissance, they sparked renewed interest in classical mythology. Artists began depicting Athena again, not as a goddess to be worshipped, but as a symbol of wisdom and culture. She appeared in paintings, sculptures, and tapestries. The Renaissance saw itself as a rebirth of classical learning, and Athena, as the goddess of wisdom, became a natural symbol of that movement. In the Age of Enlightenment, when philosophers emphasized reason and rational thought, Athena again served as a useful symbol. She represented the life of the mind, the triumph of intellect over ignorance, the importance of education and learning. Universities and libraries adopted owl imagery from Athena's sacred bird. Scholarly societies used her image on their seals and documents. The goddess of wisdom became shorthand for academic and intellectual pursuits. During the American and French revolutions, when new republics were being formed and ancient Athens was held up as a model of democracy, Athena again found relevance. She appeared in political cartoons and monuments as a symbol of civic virtue and republican government. Statues of Athena were erected in capital cities, usually with her armor and spear representing the new nation's readiness to defend itself, and her wisdom representing the hope that the nation would be governed by reason and justice. In the modern era, Athena remarkably present in popular culture. She appears in countless books, movies, television shows, and video games, usually portrayed as a wise mentor or powerful warrior. Sometimes she's faithful to her ancient characterization. Other times, she's reimagined for contemporary audiences. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series reintroduced Athena to millions of young readers, emphasizing her strategic mind. The God of War video games feature her as a complex character, sometimes ally and sometimes antagonist to the player. Films set in ancient Greece include her when they address the gods at all. Beyond popular culture, Athena's influence appears in unexpected places. The city of Athens, even in its modern form, cannot escape its namesake. The 2004 Olympic Games held in Athens explicitly connected to the ancient games and the culture that produced them, with Athena's image appearing in promotional materials and ceremonies. Owl imagery remains common in educational contexts. The phrase, bringing owls to Athens, still means doing something unnecessary. Athena's name graces universities, research centers, and think tanks. The qualities she represented, wisdom, strategy, courage combined with intelligence, remain ideals worth aspiring to. Feminist scholars have had complicated relationships with Athena. On the one hand, she's a powerful female figure in ancient mythology, a goddess who excelled in traditionally masculine domains like war and politics while maintaining her independence and identity. On the other hand, her birth from Zeus rather than a mother, her service to patriarchal power, and her sometimes harsh treatment of other women make her a problematic figure for those seeking feminist role models. Some see her as a symbol of patriarchy, co-opting and controlling female power. Others argue that she represents possibilities for women operating within and subverting male-dominated structures. Modern pagans and practitioners of Hellenic polytheism, people who actively worship the Greek gods in contemporary times, have revived Athena worship in small but dedicated communities. They make offerings, celebrate the Panathenaea in a modified form, and pray to Athena for wisdom and protection. For them, she's not just a symbol or a character from old stories, but a living goddess deserving of honor and devotion. Perhaps most significantly, Athena represents a model of power that combines traditionally masculine and feminine qualities in ways that remain relevant. She's a warrior, but not a simple fighter. She's wise, but not passive. She's protective, but demanding of respect. She helps others, but expects them to help themselves. She's connected to civilization, culture, and craft, but also to the harsh realities of warfare and survival. This complexity makes her more interesting than gods who represent single qualities or domains. She contains multitudes, just like real people do. And maybe that's why her stories continue to resonate millennia after the culture that created them disappeared. As we come to the end of this exploration of Athena's story, from her miraculous birth from Zeus's head to her role in the Trojan War, from her patronage of Athens to her worship in temples throughout the ancient world, from her terrible punishments to her generous help, we can see why she mattered so much to the Greeks. She embodied their highest values: wisdom, strategic thinking, civilized behavior, excellence in craft, courage in battle, and protection of the city and its people. She was the goddess they wanted to be like, the divine figure whose approval meant you were doing something right. The stories we've told tonight, all the myths and legends surrounding Athena, were more than entertainment for the ancient Greeks. They were teaching stories, showing how to behave and think, what to value and what to avoid. They were cultural identity, explaining what it meant to be Greek, particularly Athenian. They were religious truth, describing the goddess who protected them and demanded their honor. And they were artistic expression, giving poets and painters and sculptors material to work with, stories to tell in new and beautiful ways. These stories survived because they meant something, because they carried weight and significance that transcended any particular time or place. And perhaps, as you drift off to sleep tonight, you can imagine yourself in ancient Athens on a summer evening during the Pan-Athenaea. The sun is setting over the Aegean, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The procession has wound its way up to the Acropolis, and you're standing among the crowd of citizens and visitors, watching as the priests perform the rituals, as the peplos is presented to Athena's statue, as the sacrifices are made. You can smell the incense and the smoke from the altar fires. You can hear the hymns being sung, the prayers being offered. And above it all, watching from her temples on the high rock, is Athena herself, the gray-eyed goddess, wise and terrible and protecting, accepting the honors of her people and blessing the city that bears her name. The world has changed since then. The gods no longer walk among mortals, if they ever did. The temples are ruins, the sacrifices ended, the certainties of ancient religion replaced by doubt and multiplicity. But wisdom still matters. Strategic thinking still triumphs over brute force. Civilization still needs defending from chaos. And somewhere in the collective memory of Western culture, Athena endures, the goddess who was born from thought itself, who carried both spear and olive branch, who showed that power and wisdom could exist together, and who reminded us that the most important battles are won with the mind before they're ever fought with the sword. So, as you close your eyes and let sleep take you, remember the owl-eyed goddess, the patron of Athens, the champion of heroes, the teacher of crafts, the protector of cities. Remember that wisdom is worth pursuing, that strategy matters, that thinking before acting is not cowardice but intelligence. Remember that the Greeks, all those centuries ago, understood something important when they made Athena one of their greatest gods. And maybe, just maybe, in your dreams, you'll find yourself walking through olive groves under a Mediterranean sun, climbing marble steps to a temple on a hill, standing before a statue of a goddess in golden armor, who looks at you with gray eyes full of ancient wisdom and nods in acknowledgement. Sleep well, and may Athena guard your dreams. Before we close, if these ancient stories have helped you drift off, if the tale of Athena has calmed your mind and prepared you for rest, consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating these peaceful journeys through history and mythology, these quiet explorations of the stories that shaped human civilization. Thank you for listening, for drifting off with us into the realm of Greek mythology, for letting the goddess of wisdom guide you into dreams. Until next time, sleep well.